watching Beyond Markets and welcome. I'm Kenneth Igbomor, and on today's show, we'll find out what the future holds for Nigeria's power industry. You can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets and also follow my handle at Kenneth Igbomor. Now, the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission says there will be an increase in electricity tariffs by the 1st of April this year. The announcement came after Nigeria's electricity regulator concluded its minor review of the multi-year tariff order of 2015 and the minimum remittance order for the year 2020. Judge Etomi, a director at the Eko Electricity Distribution Company, joins me to discuss the future of Nigeria's power sector.
2019 was just one in a continuous climb towards consolidating the gains of the privatization. The journey has by no means been easy, but I always say that there is no substitute for the privatization, and what we needed to do was to get robust regulation, which is supported by policies that guide the industry. Now, on the part of the industry players, there have been more cohesion in articulating their problems. We now have fora, where from gas production to generation and to distribution, we're talking among themselves because the value chain that we need each other. In the past, we were talking at cross purposes, but perhaps the biggest happening in 2019 was the bold step the government took with the cement initiative, where I think government has finally come to the realization that you cannot run away from continuous investment in this industry. And even though they are getting export credit support from the German government through Siemens, Siemens itself working with the discos and the transmission company to make their networks more robust, so that the generating capacity which exists today and is put at varying numbers from 7 to 12,000 megawatts is at least evacuated. And I think that was one of the biggest happening, the signing of the Siemens agreement. It's brought a new fillip to the entire equation. So what was then left was for the regulator to then capture all of these, because what governs us in the industry are the orders we get from the regulator, and those are the orders that set out the parameters for all the policies and all the other initiatives. So these have finally been captured, and the order has now been released, and it is disco specific. So each disco has their targets, their revenue targets, their tariffs, yes, and so many of these other things. So it's a continuing. Let me say, in terms of continuing on the right path, I would say 2019 is one of the best years.
Yes, because I would like to get there, because we're looking at from the consumer point of view. We're seeing starting 2020 yes, with a tariff review. We're hit with the news. We've seen how that has played out into the. From the consumer's point of view, we're starting 2020 with the tariff review. The NERC is coming up with the mighty review, and then we're seeing that which is going to take effect in 2020. I'd like you to speak on this and help us understand the process that led to this.
Okay. Now, upon the inception of the privatization, there were obligations on the part of the government. Government is represented in the privatization by the BPE and the regulator. Independent though, but it's a government-appointed regulator. They are the ones who set the industry rules. The corollary to that are the industry players, the GENCOs, and especially the DISCOs. Now, those rules give the targets. Now, upon inception, it was understood that the yardstick for measuring the efficiency of DISCOs is their ability to reduce the aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses, the AT&C losses. Now, each DISCO had to do a review of the state of its operations and of the state of its equipment, and then made the case to the regulator. Regulator sent independent assessors, and from there they say, okay, we give you a loss target reduction of a certain amount, and it varies from DISCO to DISCO. Now, based on that, you go backward, they now begin to give you a tariff that enables you achieve that. Now, that tariff is made up of so many components. To generate electricity, 70% of electricity comes from thermal plants. The feedstock is gas. So the cost of gas is a major element. Now, one of the biggest problems we've had has been the exchange rate. At inception, the exchange rate was about 190 to 1. And we've been carrying that figure unrealistically. No disco buys any of its foreign exchange components at 190. At one stage, it was 550, but it's been consistently about 360. So you can imagine the shortfall that would have arisen from a difference between 190 and 360. Then you have issues to do with transmission challenges. The grid itself is old, and from time to time we have total grid collapses. And anytime the grid collapses completely, it takes a while to come back up. And those are all are the things that go into assessing how well a disco is performing. Now, under the privatization agreement, there was a minimum amount of power that the government also guaranteed that discos will get, 5,000 megawatts. As we know, we only attained that threshold once. It's generally been between 3,000 and 4,000 megawatts. Now, the sum total of all these is that we were made to sell a product at below the cost. And somehow, government is struggling to fill that gap. But perhaps one of the biggest problems has been the reluctance of the ministries, departments, and agencies of government, MDA, to pay their debts. And this is where I keep saying that the government must show good example. If the MDAs are not paying their debts, and that debt is climbed to close to 140 billion for the entire value chain, it is not a good thing.
Yeah, because yes, it's on one part it's good for the government to pay that, but then I'm looking for from the consumer side, from the private consumers, people who run residences, people who run hotels.
Yes.
A tariff hike coming in April. You're definitely going to get kickbacks from the consumers, because they would like to understand, what is happening and why is this happening right now. But what are the enforcement challenges you foresee in putting this new tariff in place, and how do you plan to overcome some of that?
Well, one of the things I think we owe consumers is a continuing education about the journey of the power sector. It shouldn't be a we versus them thing. Without consumers, we're not in business. So consumers have a right to ask, what am I getting in return for an increased tariff? They have every right to ask. And part of what I think many of these discos are now doing is engaging more. Now, the big problem has been, because transiting from a wholly government-owned thing has given consumers a sense of entitlement. So we have a large band of consumers who do not even want to hear. It's not even a worry. They just feel it's their own entitlement, it's their own share of the national cake. Please leave it the way it is. But there are enlightened consumers who see the benefit of steady electricity, even if you have to pay more, because in total, it reduces cost for them. Now, let me give you an idea of the numbers. If you generate power using diesel as your fuel, you are spending close to 100 naira per kilowatt hour of electricity. Add to that any solar thing you've also installed alongside, and add to that any inverter. You may find your global cost for generating power is around 150 to 160 naira per kilowatt hour. Grid power, which is what we're talking about, is between 24 and 32 naira. Now, no system should allow that sort of gap. It leads to arbitraging. And that is why I worry that when people are saying no, 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 it's a suggestion that we should remain the way that we are. Now, I will give you an example in my office. Before things improved, we were spending about 250,000 naira on diesel a month. And our regular grid power was between 75 and 100. So my global energy cost was about 400,000 350 to 400,000. Now, if you told me to pay cost-reflective tariff, assuming the tariff doubles, and I have to start pay 150,000 naira, and then that guarantees that my generator remains silent. I don't have to buy diesel. I don't have to pay repair costs. In total, it's cheaper for my business. Now, people then ask, which comes before the other? Must that service be provided before you can increase it? And I tell them they go hand in hand. Because if they don't go hand in hand, because one of the arguments I've heard from consumers is meter everybody.
Because I was actually going to get that because it's a challenge that because some consumers watching this will say, oh well, it's one thing for you to say if you're going to double that, but then we get estimated bills because we don't know the exact amount of power we're consuming, and we don't think we're being properly assessed on how our consuming power. It brings to fore the challenge of the metering gap, and I'd like to know, what strides have we made from 2019 up until now, and how do we plan to ramp up that because I understand we have about 5 million unmetered people.
Probably more. Now, at the point of privatization, don't forget, we did not have many discos on account of labor intervention because of their arguments for severance payments, did not allow the shadow management period discos were supposed to have, where you shadow, say for a 6-month period, and give on-ground assessment of what you paid for, because many of us got our information from the data room and all that. But as it turned out to be, the first time we got in there was when we got in there. And we found that statistics are a tough thing in this country. This is even on the government side. A very big challenge. They told us 4 million. We calculated based on 4 million. We're now hearing that figure is close to 12 million. Now, if a meter costs about 40,000 naira, for argument's sake, and you have about 8 million people unmetered, are you suggesting, you look at the amount of money, how many, 3 trillion, whatever. Is that what an investor should do first before he gets a return? No. What you do is, against the promise that you will meet up with this, the two must go side by side. Because once that is done, then other investors, don't look at these investors alone. Look at other banks, other people who are interested. They will come in. It happened in the telecom sector. Now, what then happens to estimated bills? There is a methodology to estimated billing. And I sympathize with those who get crazy bills. We don't support it, and anytime we have complaints about it, we deal with it. It's sharp practice, it is inexcusable. There is a methodology to estimated billing because we too, discos get what they call input meters. We too are metered. So when we send power to a particular transformer, if there are 200 people on that transformer, we have an idea of how much they are consuming. Now, assuming for any reason 80 of them are unmetered, you will have a fair idea of how much they should be paying based on the global picture that goes there. But part of the problem is also consumers. Many of them engage in energy theft. They actually pay for their meters to be bypassed. So at times when you have a meter, it's no guarantee that you're seeing
these were some of the legacy challenges that were already on ground.
No, not a question of legacy. It's a habit thing. It's a habit thing. Some people, it's just perennial. We're using as much as we can technology to try and overcome the challenges, but it's there. But I mean, morally, nobody should even go in that direction, because the danger here is that any time you see your neighbor cheat and you keep quiet, you are indirectly bearing that expense. And that is what we need to let people know, because we are obliged to pay for the power we get. So somehow we have to release it on consumers. And that is why I know the confusion comes in. Now, part of the new order is an estimated billing methodology. And it is important for consumers, and I keep saying this, to be a bit more interested in the sector. Just don't wait and hear and grumble or whatever. Exercise your right. The power industry anywhere in the world is one of the most heavily regulated industries. And that is because the regulator must find that balance between the profit motive of the operators and then satisfying the needs of the consumers. And in many, many, many climes, we use the Delhi model for our own privatization. Government just doesn't walk away because it's been privatized. And in any case, government are still 40% owners of the discos, 20% of the gencos. So they still have a continuing obligation to do that until a period where you can face it. So there will be incremental improvement. It's not going to be overnight. But what must not be done is we shouldn't disrupt the journey. And about the value chain challenges, the value chain actually starts with gas. So we need to deal with this issue of gas pricing because you need to get steady, regular, and reliable supply of gas. Today, most of the IOCs who have most of the gas are flaring the gas. And they will tell you they're doing that because, or liquefying it to export. They will tell you because the pricing is not right. Today, gas is priced at about $3.80. The international price is around about $7.70. So there's no incentive for them to produce gas for domestic use. So what the government should do, in my opinion, is to then lean towards indigenous producers. Not because you should ride roughshod over them, but you can actually appeal, in a sense, to their patriotism. Also create the enabling environment so that they can divert some of their gas to power. They're also in business. Their expense is in forex. So you must accommodate them. So that's where the first challenge comes. Then with the generating companies, similar to the gas thing, many of them have invested in capacity. Ideally, they should be given not just capacity charge, but generation charge. They must be given capacity charge. Today, they're only being given generation charge. Many of them have capacity that's not being paid for. So they are bleeding as well. Then the transmission side, that is still 100% government, and we know what those challenges are. The grid is old, it frequently collapses yeah. And by the time it comes back on and all whatnot. On the distribution side of things, many of the distribution equipment and networks, old and all that. So it's not going to be an overnight solution. It's a journey that we've started, and we must be faithful to that journey. Each time we do a major stop-start. We lost 5 years, in my opinion, arguing and trading blames.
Yeah, because we had the issues around remittances.
We all knew from the very beginning, remittance levels, no remittance levels and all that. Because the issue, the baseline crisis in industry is liquidity. And what will assure you of liquidity is fresh investment. And fresh investment in the sectors is guaranteed by a stable legal and regulatory regime. No favors about that. If you, for example, were going to invest $10,000, you would go into a business that guarantees you a minimum return. You're not going to a business in which you are told, wait, do everything first. If you go to your mechanic to fix your car, do you tell the mechanic, okay, fix it, let me drive it. If I'm sure, I'll come back and pay you. If 10 people ask him that, he'll be out of business.
We'll get into the liquidity challenge a bit and also understand, how the sector can attract more investment. But I'd like to first, look at some innovative solutions that have come up from last year. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it earlier while we were talking on the show, the government, the partnership between the Nigerian government and Siemens.
Yes.
How that sort of innovative thinking can help to revolutionize how the industry can develop. I'd like you to speak to that, and what stage are we at on
now, where we are is that the effort between the government and, it's actually a government-to-government thing between Nigerian government and the German government. It's just that the German government is working through Siemens. It's just part of addressing the liquidity crisis. It's not for free. It's an export credit facility that's extended to us at very, very low interest rates. So that, and in any case, our banks are overburdened. You can't go to this market to borrow anymore. Then the idea is for that the funds there for Siemens, because they're very strong, they've done it in Egypt, they have a good track record in the power industry, to look at the status of the distribution and transmission companies and work with them to provide the equipment that will strengthen them to receive, at least in the first instance, the generating capacity, as I told you, that's available, which is between 7 and 10,000. For now, they say it's 7. We can take 5. 2,000 is idle. So, first of all, improve the network, transmission and distribution, so that you can absorb the 7. By 2021, they expect that you would have been able to take the remaining 13. And then the idea is that by 2023, you can then move forward and increase the capacity to the grid capacity, the generating capacity to about 25,000 megawatts. Now, to give you an idea, if you use generating capacity as an index of development, you'll see where we are. The Millennium Goals, set for us, Sustainable Development Goals, sorry, tell us that averagely for sustainable development, you need 1,000 megawatts per 1 million population. So ideally, with a 200 million population, we're looking at 200,000 megawatts. South Africa, with around about 40-something, 50-something million people, are doing close to 40,000 megawatts. So as an index of development, you can see that we are lagging way behind. But I can assure you, we cannot leapfrog this process in the sort of strides that we all want. Yes. It's going to be gradual and incremental, even if for quite a bit, as they're doing in many other African countries that are on the path to growth and recovery, you begin to guarantee a minimum number of supply per day, and you slowly increase that. Meanwhile, you prioritize. I know you talked about in the industrial sector.
Because I was going to get into that, because as a company that's looking to industrialize, we're trying to do so much for the power sector. And when I look at this power sector and the challenges that we're facing, I look at it from the point of view of opportunities missed. Because I can imagine if over 30 years ago we had this sorted, I can imagine the new industries that we would have had in the country. I can imagine how we would have been, making products for the rest of West Africa. But all that is not happening right now. So from the government point of view, trying to look for that policy trust as a response to stem the tide that we're seeing here in the power sector. For you as someone in the private sector, what kind of policy response would you want the government to be looking into as we go into the year?
Okay, let me just sort of situate this. If I had my way, and I say a lot of this with the benefit of hindsight, with what we've seen in the banking sector from our tally number days to telecoms, from where we were in telecoms, where there was total available penetration was 400,000 to nearly 130 million we have today. With the benefit of hindsight, the power privatization should have actually preceded these two. Because if you know, exactly. And today, around about 40% of their costs goes on self-generation. So the real winners here are your generator companies and your diesel companies. So in terms of policy thrust to address the issue, I think we're on the right track. It's to address the trust issues from years of indolence between, let me say, government, us, and the consumers as the problem. That's why I said meters, for example. That is, for me, the yardstick. It's the trust instrument. I don't want you to take me for a ride. What gives me that assurance is the meter. But the challenge with the meter is that if you say meter everybody before you can make a tariff adjustment, you won't find investments. That's my worry. You really need to get to that point where people with deep pockets can come into the industry, like happened with telecoms. Remember when he first came, SIM cards by 50K, 200K, big numbers, everybody was screaming. The regulator stood his ground. And by not tinkering with it, he attracted more investments. With investment comes competition. With competition, prices will go. Yes. And don't forget, in the case of the power sector, there's a new game changer, like with telecoms. When GSM came, it changed landline forever.
Okay.
Now we are seeing renewables. The power sector is not going to be what it is today.
Yeah.
So with renewables, look, in the future, you can control your power from your phone. That's where we're heading to.
So we're looking at that.
But what we must do is just stay faithful and stay on the course.
And that was George Etomi, is a director at the Eko Electricity Distribution Company. And that's it on Beyond Markets for today. And thank you so much for being a part of the show. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website. And that's at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets and follow me at Kenneth Igbomor. Have a wonderful day.